I know some of you may not have had time to finish quite yet, but let's take a peek. First thing you really want to do is you want to figure out what the invoiced price is here. So to get the invoiced price, we're going to look at the list price, the $23,000, and the trade discount. So we're actually going to start with that trade discount. So the 937 is going to translate the perfect. 0.91 times 0.97 times 0.93. It's 100 minus each of those. 100 minus 9 is 91. 100 minus 3 is 97. 100 minus 7 is 93. And I wrote 0.97 again. So there we go. If we multiply that out, .820911. To find the actual invoiced amount, we're going to take the list price of $23,000 times that number. So 18,880.95. So that is the amount that appears on the invoice. Next, if we looked at a timeline for our payment, where does this timeline start? Well, normally the timeline starts at the date of the purchase, the date the invoice is generated, which is May 28th. Is there anything in this invoice that changes that? EOM, which means everything gets pushed to the end of the month. So does this one get dated May 30th or May 31st? No. No, neither one. Because it's after the 25th, it's on the 26th or later, it gets put into the next month. So this one gets dated June 30th, the end of the June batch. So that means the discount period, it was a 3/10. So that's going to end on July 10th. 3% discount. And of course, it would be due July 30th. So they made a payment on July 8th, which means they get the 3% discount. They made an $11,000 payment. What's the first thing that has to happen to that $11,000 payment? Take out the freight. That $11,000 payment minus the $900 for freight. So it's a $10,100 that's going to get applied towards the invoice. But the amount of credit then is going to be determined by that $10,100. What are we going to do to it? Careful. Not times, but divide. There we go. 3% means 100 minus 3 is 0.97. So 10,100 divided by 0.97 is $10,412.37. That is the amount of credit. So from that, to figure out the balance due, we take the invoice amount, the $18,880.95, and we will subtract from that that credit amount. So $8,468.58 is the balance due, or the outstanding balance. Now in our next unit, we'll look at, okay, what if they don't pay that by, of course that balance due is due by July 30th. What if they don't pay that by July 30th? How do they start then charging interest on that money? But for this unit, we're just concerned about what that balance is, and we're assuming it's paid on time for now. Any questions on that problem? How many of you feel like you could do a problem like that on a test? Okay, I'm getting like a fourth of you. Do you want to see one more?
Yes.
Okay.
That'd be nice.
What's that? Okay. So let's do TLP company. Purchases equipment. Listed for $9,800 on December 20th. TLP receives a 12.8 trade discount the seller prepaid $450 in freight. The terms are let's do this 210.15 net, or 115 I should say, net 30. TLP pays $3,500 on January 2nd. Find the outstanding balance. So we'll pause this for you and give you a couple minutes. Okay, let's see how you're doing. So again, we're going to start out with that invoiced amount, and to find that, we're going to use that 12.8 trade discount. Of course, the 12.8 is going to be converted to 0.88 times 0.92. So 0.8096. To find our amount that's going to appear on the invoice, we'll take our 9,800 list price times that amount. So 79.3408. So that is the amount that appears on the invoice. From here, we got to look at our timeline. Where does this timeline start? December 20th. It actually starts on the date given. And there's actually two breaks here. The 2% period ends at 10 days, which would be December 30th. Then there's a 1% that goes for 5 more days past that, which would be...
Would that be January 14th?
January 4th.
Oh, 4th.
Remember, all these dates go back to the original invoice date. So the 210 starts at the December 20th. The 115, that 15 also starts back on December 20th. So it's only an additional 5 days past the original 10. And then, of course, the net 30 is going to be January 19th. So the payment on January 2nd is eligible for a discount of how much? 1%. But of course, what's going to happen to that $3,500 first? Shipping. So that $3,500 payment, we shall first subtract the $450 of shipping to get $3,050 that's going to actually be applied now towards the invoice. So what do we do to that $3,050 to get the amount of credit? Divide by 0.99. Perfect. 1% gives us 0.99. $30.80.81. So $3,080.81. That is the amount of credit that goes towards that invoice. So to find our balance, it's going to be that invoice of $79.3408, which is the invoice amount. And yes, we're going to subtract that credit, $3,080.81, $4,853.27 is the balance due on January 19th, or by January 19th. What do you think? They get better with time, right? Okay. So last week, we mentioned that there are 3 stages in this process. There is the supplier, who can either be a manufacturer or wholesaler. And then there is the retailer, who's in the middle, basically the middleman. And then there is the consumer. And last week, what we were discussing was the invoicing process and stuff from that supplier to the retailer. This week, we're going to go from the retailer to the consumer. Basically, and not necessarily all the way to the consumer, but when it comes in the door at the retailer, what they do before they pass it along to the consumer. So there is going to be a price coming in to the retailer. It's going to be their cost. And of course, that's what they're paying to that supplier, plus any shipping or whatever. For what we're going to do tonight, we're going to assume that if we say an item costs a certain dollar amount, the cost of shipping and other things are already included in that. So then what the retailer charges the consumer is called the selling price. Again, we're looking at this from the viewpoint of the retailer. they're buying and they're selling. Well, somewhere in the middle there, that retailer has to cover other expenses, overhead, such as, the rent of their building, electricity, utilities, other things, and then make a profit. And that is all part of what we're going to refer to as the markup. That is what the retailer adds to the price to, again, to cover those overhead expenses and their profit. Now, if this were an accounting class, we'd get into an official definition of overhead. All overhead, what overhead is pretty much expenses that cannot be contributed or attributed to a single product. Like when you buy a product, the cost of the product itself can be matched to that product. The cost of shipping it can be matched to that product. Even a certain amount of your labor can be matched to that product. But there are other expenses like, cost of management expenses, administrative expenses, office supplies that are not directly linked to selling, the rent of the building, utilities and other things that you're going to have to pay whether you sell anything or not. You cannot identify those and link those to a specific product. We are going to just consider that all part of the markup for right now. In accounting, if you were in accounting, there's some very extensive processes you go through as to how do you distribute that overhead to the cost of products and stuff like that, which you guys haven't upset me enough to go through that in here yet.
We're going to start crying soon.
I'll be nice. So the main formula that governs all of this stuff that we outlined here is cost plus markup equals the selling price. You are going to get sick of that formula by the end of the night because we're going to spend at least an hour and a half with that being in about every third sentence of what I say. There are two types of cost, or two types of markup, I should say. We have the percent markup, which is a percent, and then there's now I'm going to notice I'm leaving a little bit of space here, the dollar markup. The markup in this formula can be either one depending on what type of numbers we're putting in. And we'll show you in just a few minutes what I mean by that. The percent markup can happen in one of two ways. It can be a percent markup based on cost, or it can be a percent markup based on the selling price. The tough part with these two things here is the process is extremely similar between the two of them with just a couple of very, very subtle differences. So the tough part is keeping the processes straight. Now, the markup based on cost is kind of the common sense one that if anybody without retail experience were asked how you would figure out a markup, that's the way we would do it. But there are definitely reasons why you would do markup based on selling price as well, and we'll discuss those as we go through. So anyway, before I get in too much detail on that, let's step back about 5 weeks now, and remember when we were talking about percents. And when we had, let's say that there was after a 12% price increase, a ticket now costs $728. How much did the cost go up? Or the price go up, however you want to write it. If you remember, when we did these problems, we had a little chart we did. And the words we put in here didn't matter. We're going to have old price plus increase equals new price. This looking familiar at all? Good. And remember, each of those, when we're dealing with a percent problem, each of those numbers is described by a percent and by another number, in this case, dollars. The 12%, of course, is the amount of the increase. That goes in here. The $728 goes where? The new price, $728. Now, it looks like that's all we have, but what piece of information do we always have? The 100%. And we've said in a problem like this, the 100% is either the whole amount or the starting amount. And the starting amount here would be the old price. That's 100%. The 100% describes the item that all the other calculations are based on. I'm going to make a note of that. In this type of problem, all the other calculations are based on what the old price was. So now then I can find the percent of the new price because it's 100 plus 12, or 112%. And what was I asked to find here? How much the cost went up. So I'm asked to find the increase, the dollar amount of the increase, which would be that number. So here, I don't need this line here. The bottom line, the new price, I have both the percent and the dollar amount. So I'm going to use that one. And I'm looking for the increase. So I need to use that one. So to find that missing number, I can do it right in the table here. Cross multiply 12 times 728 divided by 112. Gives me $78. So the price of that ticket went up by $78 due to that 12% increase. Now the reason I went back to show you that example is that our first type of markup is going to be percent markup based on cost. In a percent markup based on cost, the dollar amount of the markup, the dollar markup, is calculated as a percent of the cost. What does that mean? The cost is 100%. Which, when we go to set this up, we might look and say, well, that's pretty obvious. The cost will be 100%. What's going to be trickier is the examples where the cost is not the 100%, as we get to those later. So let's say as a company, we have a 30% markup on costs. Now I notice I cut that phrase a little short. Rather than saying markup based on cost, I just said markup on cost. That's a pretty common abbreviation of that phrase. So 30% markup on cost. Find the selling price for an item that cost $70. Well, this one we probably don't need the table for because it's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to do it anyway. Cost plus markup, I'm going to use MU for markup, equals selling price. I'm going to use SP for selling price. We're going to write this table out enough tonight that we're going to need some abbreviations. And on one side is the percent, on the other side is the dollars. 30% represents the markup. $70 represents cost. Cost $70. And the 100 goes where? In the cost. Because it's markup based on cost. So that means that the selling price is 100 plus 30, or 130%. So we're either looking for the dollar amount of the markup, or we're looking for the dollar amount of the selling price. Which one are we asked for? Selling price. Find the selling price. So in this problem, this is the line we don't need. Does everybody see why we don't need that line? Any questions on why we don't need it? With the cost, we have both numbers, so that's going to be useful to us. The selling price is the one we're looking for, so we have to use that one. So it's that markup line that wasn't useful. So we're going to cross multiply here. 130 times 70 divided by the 100 is going to be, what, 91? So the selling price is $91. So if we have an item that costs $180, has a 32% markup on cost. We're asked to find the dollar markup. Well, again, this one's pretty straightforward. Cost plus markup equals selling price. Got our percents and our dollars. Burn that little table into your head because, like I said, you are going to make it dozens of times before we're done tonight. Where's the $180 go? On the cost under the dollar side, 180 bucks. Where's the 32 go? On the left by the markup, 32%. Now this says markup based on cost or on cost, so that means 100% goes with the cost. What else does that tell us right offhand?
132%.
Selling price is 132%. What are we looking for here? The dollar amount of the markup. So we're looking for this number. So here I don't need the bottom line. So I'm going to cross multiply. 32 times 180 divided by 100. So $57.60 is the dollar amount of the markup. Any questions? Okay, good. So let's say we have an item that sells for $210 and has a 30% markup on cost. We're asked to find the cost. Might be able to guess what goes in the table. Cost plus markup equals selling price. What do we know?
Selling price on the bottom right.
Perfect. 210 is on the dollar side with the selling price.
Markups bottom left.
Perfect. Markup 30 is on the percent side of the markup. And of course, markup on cost means 100 goes with the cost. Then what? Yep, we're looking for the cost, but we can add the 100 plus the 30% means the selling price is 130%. And yes, we are looking for the dollar amount of the cost. So which row don't we need? The markup, yes, 30. So now it's 100 times 210 divided by 130. $161.54 was the cost. Bless you. So let's say we have an item that costs $28. The selling price is $37. I ask you to find the dollar amount of the markup. You're thinking too hard. Dollar amount of the markup has to be $9. Why? We can do the chart. Yeah, we're given the dollar amount of the cost is $28 and the selling price is $37. These two have to add up. This plus this has to add up to the 37. So this just has to be the difference, the $9. Subtracting them.
That's the cost. That's not the markup based on cost, but just the cost of.
That's just the markup no matter what, period.
Okay.
Dollar markup is a dollar markup. It's the percent markup that has to be either based on cost or based on selling price. So if our cost is $28 and our selling price, this time we're going to make the selling price $35, find the percent markup on cost. Now we're going to have to do a little more work. So cost plus markup equals selling price again. Percents on the left, dollars on the right. What do we know? Cost is $28 on the dollar side. What else do we know? $35 is the selling price on the dollar side. We also know the 100. Where does the 100 go? On cost. So on the percent side, the 100 goes with the cost. Now there's one other number we can find really quickly here. What is it? Dollar amount of the markup. The difference between 28 and 35 is $7. What are we looking for here? Percent markup right there. So this time it's the bottom row that I don't need. I will cross multiply. 100 times 7 divided by 28 is 25. There's a 25% markup on cost.
What more work do you have to do other than subtract SP from cost?
Pretty much that's it.
Okay.
Let's say we've got an item that costs us $85. The dollar amount of the markup is $34. Find percent markup on cost.
Now, is it always going to stay in the middle? It's always going to be cost plus or minus the markup?
Yep.
So it's always the same.
That's always the same, yeah. What I have there right now in brown, this will not change when we're dealing with, it's always cost plus markup equals selling price. Now there might be discounts and markdowns and stuff like that. That'll be a different chart. But when we're talking about markups, it's always going to be exactly like that. So what do we know? Cost is 85. What else?
34 on the markup.
34 on the dollar side of the markup. And the always lurking 100% goes on the cost. It says on cost. We are looking for percent markup. Now we could add really quickly here and get the dollar amount of the selling price as $119, but it really doesn't do us any good here because we're not going to use the bottom row anyway. So we'll cross multiply and divide. 100 times 34 divided by 85 gives us 40. Is a 40% markup on selling price. So an item that has a selling price of $280. There is a 40% markup on cost. Find the dollar amount of the markup. This is one that without that table, it might be a struggle to figure out. With the table, really doesn't hurt us at all. So cost plus markup equals selling price. This is our percent cost, or percent side. This is our dollar side. What do we know? 40% goes on the percent side of the markup. 280 goes on the dollar side for the selling price. And of course, the ever lurking 100 goes on the cost. Now here we are going to have to do a little bit. We're going to have to find this number, which is 140. Just 100 plus 40. Perfect. We are looking for
Dollar markup.
the dollar amount of the markup right there. So we do not need top row. Cross multiply and divide. 40 times 280 divided by 140 is $80. It's the dollar amount of the markup.
What's the difference between the cost and the markup on based on cost? I know you said this before.
Well, the markup based on cost is a percentage that's calculated out of the cost. Here, let me do a complete problem out here for you. So you've got an item that costs $150, and there is a 60% markup on cost.
Okay.
Now I'm not asking for anything in particular, I'm just asking find everything.
Okay.
Cost plus markup equals selling price. Percent in dollars. We know the $150 cost. We know the 60% markup. Now, the markup on cost or based on cost, that's telling us that the cost represents the 100%.
Okay.
So then we add the 100 and the 60 to get 160% is what the selling price is.
Okay.
We can find the markup here. Cross multiply and divide 60 times 150 divided by 100 be $90. I could find the selling price here. I could do the 160 times 150 divided by 100, or I could just do the 150 plus 90 is $240.
Great. Okay.
Now, before we go on break, let's shatter everything you thought to be true. I kind of do, yeah. What if it's 25% markup on selling price? And let's say you're given that the selling price is $180. Let's fill in the table. Cost plus markup equals selling price. Got percents, we got dollars. 25% goes on the percent side of the markup. 180 goes dollar side of the selling price. Our ever lurking 100 goes on selling price. Because the markup is based on the selling price, that is saying we're using the selling price as the base of our percent. Therefore, it is the 100. So that means the cost has to be 75. Because remember, cost plus markup has to equal selling price. 75 plus 25 equals 100. So this is what we're going to use to base our calculations on for the next 20 minutes or so. Let's go ahead and take our break. We'll come back at about 6:31.